Howdy, I'm Big Juicy and I'm in Slidell, Louisiana to see where an auto racing legend spent his last days before hanging it up for good. The Chevrolet brothers, Louis, Gaston, and Arthur, came over from Switzerland in the early 1900s. The brothers were known as expert race car drivers, and Arthur even raced in the inaugural Indianapolis 500, driving a Buick. Louis and Arthur gained the attention of William Durant, who was running things at the Buick Motor Company. Together, they worked up a plan to start a brand new car company of their own, and Chevrolet Motor Company was born. The Chevrolet brothers engineered a car built around an overhead valve engine, and by 1913, they were in full production, making about 6,000 cars a year. After some differences with Durant that led to a fist fight, Louis sold his shares in the company, and the Chevrolet brothers took their toys and went home. Chevrolet Motors kept the name and the bow tie logo design modeled after the Swiss cross, a symbol from the land of Louis and Arthur. The Chevrolet brothers continued to pursue auto racing and started the FRONTENAC Motor Company to make high-performance race cars. Ironically, these were built off of Ford engines. Albert Champion, a famous French cyclist, was a partner in the new venture. However, after some disagreements over spark plug design that led to a fist fight, he left the company. He would go on to create Champion spark plugs, which is now AC Delco. The AC, it stands for Albert Champion. The brothers had pretty good success with the Frontenac racing cars. Gaston won the 1920 Indy 500 driving a Frontenac, but then he died in a racing accident a few months later. The car company eventually went bankrupt after a failed deal to make passenger cars. In 1929, Louis and Arthur created the Chevrolet Brothers Aircraft Company, and the brothers began working to design the Chevrolet aircraft engine. Their work attracted the attention of Glenn Martin, and due to the financial troubles of the Great Depression and a few fistfights between the brothers, Martin took over the company in 1931. He changed the name to Glenn L. Martin Motors Corporation, and this company would later become what is now known as Lockheed Martin. The brothers grew tired of creating successful businesses for other people. In 1936, Arthur started working as an experimental mechanic for Cummins in Columbus, Indiana. Louis died in 1941 from complications from a leg amputation. About that same time, Preston Tucker, who worked with the Chevrolet brothers' 1935 Indy race team, asked Arthur to come to work with him on his new venture in aviation. Arthur planned on staying in Columbus, but he said, "I was offered a job I couldn't very well turn down." This quote would come to the attention of director Francis Ford Coppola, and he modified it to an offer he can't refuse, and he used it in his 1972 movie, The Godfather. Preston Tucker created the Tucker Aviation Corporation, which was in the process of merging with Higgins Industries in New Orleans. Higgins is famous for designing and building the amphibious watercraft that stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. These plywood boats were known as Higgins boats and were instrumental in winning the war. Dwight Eisenhower, the inventor of the military-industrial complex, said that Andrew Higgins is the man that won the war for the U.S. and us. The Higgins factory was built along the Intracoastal Waterway on land purchased from the old MICHOUD plantation near New Orleans. Higgins and Tucker's Aviation Company needed a name, and after a couple bottles of bourbon and a fist fight, they settled on Higgins Tucker Aviation. They landed a contract with the U.S. government to build the C-76 plywood cargo plane. Because plywood needs to be kept hot and damp to keep it flexible, New Orleans was the ideal place to build them. The government took over Higgins' boat factory, and the Army Corps of Engineers started adding on an aviation plant. There was a small problem, though. MICHOUD is located on the fastest sinking part of Louisiana, in one of the fastest sinking areas of the Gulf region. It is currently 3 feet below sea level. But that didn't deter the Army Corps of Engineers, though. Their motto is Essayons, or let us try. The number of piles and fill dirt needed to keep the factory afloat delayed completion of the plant, and the government canceled the contract before the first plane was built. The Army Corps finally finished the plant, and it became the MICHOUD assembly facility. During the height of the space race, this plant manufactured the SATURN rockets and the external fuel tank for NASA's space shuttle. After the contract was canceled, Tucker left the company and went back up north. After all his trouble, Higgins had this to say about Preston Tucker. He's the world's greatest salesman. When he turns those big brown eyes on you, you better watch out. Tucker would go on to make, or not, the 1948 Tucker Torpedo. This is the focus of the 1988 biographical comedy drama, also directed by Francis Ford Coppola, Tucker, the Man in His Dream. While working for Higgins, Arthur Chevrolet lived in this house on Carey Street in Slidell, which is across the lake from New Orleans. During the war, Arthur's grandson, Gerald, came down to visit. He took him down to Pontchartrain Beach to go swimming over near the amusement park. The 8-year-old boy was swimming about 40 yards out when he went below the water and didn't come back up. The boy was taken into Charity Hospital, but they were unable to save his life. Arthur lived a life full of disappointment. Despite being a brilliant mechanic, things just never worked out in his favor. He grew more and more despondent, and on top of all of this, he was coping with his wife's dementia. Without a factory, the Higgins Corporation disbanded after the war, and Arthur lost his job. Even though he had a trip planned to the Indy 500 in May, on April 16, 1946, after paying his income taxes, Arthur took his life by hanging himself in his Slidell home. At 61 years old, the man who was a better engineer than he was a businessman was dead. For years, it was assumed that Arthur was buried next to his brothers in Holy Cross and Jesus, Mary, and Joseph Cemetery in Indianapolis. In 2011, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway even placed a marker on Arthur's grave, but later found out that it was his son, Arthur Jr.'s. The mystery of where the real Arthur Chevrolet was buried went on for years until someone finally read the newspapers. Clearly, in all of the obituaries, he's buried right here in Slidell. It turns out that Arthur requested in a letter to his daughter that he wanted to be buried in Slidell in an unmarked grave. After the fist fight with his brother Louis, he specifically asked not to be buried in Indianapolis with his brothers. His death certificate says he's buried in the Catholic cemetery in Slidell, Our Lady of Lourdes. His grave is not marked, and the records were washed away with Hurricane Katrina, so no one is sure exactly where he lies. It's tradition for bodies to be buried laying east to west, with their feet pointing east. This is based on the belief that when Jesus returns, he'll be coming from the east, as it's described in Matthew 24:27. Because of the Catholic Church's negative view on suicide, it may be, just maybe, that the one grave in the cemetery that's not marked and is facing north to south is Arthur's final resting spot. Well, I'm Big Juicy, and this has been Big Juicy Tidbit number 15. Please subscribe to my channel to receive updates when new videos are posted. Also, visit my website at bigjuicytidbits.com to see additional content for each video. Remember, some people make history, and some people make up history. Until next time, keep it juicy.